This piece of content is brought to you by Micro Center. Go to the links in the description to see their top deals for July and also check out their other deals like $25 off all CPUs and the new locations that they are opening. And then also this podcast is brought to you by CDkeyoffer.com, where you can get reasonably priced Microsoft keys. Use offer code BrokenSilicon to save 25% on all Microsoft products, and then also use offer code BrokenSilicon to save 10% on tasty Vite Ramen, Nano Boost Powder, and other great Vite products. And we'll talk about these sponsors more later. But for now, let's get on with the show. And welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and today I am joined by my co-host,
Dan.
How you doing, Dan?
Pretty good, I suppose. How are you doing?
I was like, oh, does Dan just have a stroke? I mean, I'm doing fine, I suppose. I no longer have a cold, and everything.
The fun thing about colds, though, is there's just like the week and a half where you feel fine, but your nose is still just clogged, or are you coughing all the time?
This time around, no, I do not have that. What I have is just a lingering brain fog. So if at any point I just, if I kind of start talking in almost like Obama-esque cadence where like I have a weird pause and then just continue the sentence, that's just because my brain skipped. I've been doing it for a few days now. I think I almost did it just there, actually. So I'm not dying. I just got out over a cold, and it's just that. And actually, anything else health-wise is going quite well.
Now the top comment's going to be, Tom said he isn't dying. Does that mean he secretly is?
Secretly is, yeah. And now, here's the problem, though. Now that I've said that I have a little bit of a brain fog, now people are going to be like micro-analyzing every second to see, well, he paused an extra microsecond between those two words. Was that what he was talking about?
Or speculating.
Most likely you won't notice anything, people.
We're speculating. Brain fog. Does Tom have COVID and he doesn't want to tell us for
and he
some
won't
reason?
Tell anyone because he's a secret COVID spreader or something, which that is, I think people get accused of, actually. Not really anymore, but that definitely was a thing.
Yeah, I know. I would like it, though, if we just decided to start doing that now, despite in the past being very open about when we have COVID.
Oh yes, but now we don't.
Now it's locked down.
But I got to go on this trip, so I don't care who gets sick. I'm just no. That is not what's going on. But what is going on is I'm going to get out of this weird conversation we're having and start with some corrections here. QH Freddy writes in, and he says, in Broken Silicon 262, you justified the Ryzen 9600X as probably being 10% slower but 10% cheaper than the 7800 X3D, and also having similar or higher multi-threading, which all honestly seems like a fair enough estimation considering what we know so far. But if you also suggested it may use half the power of the 7800 X3D, if this is genuinely what you believe, I'd like to know on what basis you are concluding that. So it goes on to try to estimate how to get to this much performance. How could it possibly have that level of power, and he doesn't see it being likely at all that it's going to be half of the power consumption, especially the best way he says you could assume N4 is maybe 20% more efficient than N5. And so I actually put a bunch of effort into replying to this question, QH Freddy. I will say first, it's a bit hyperbolic or reckless maybe to say half. I didn't literally think it's going to, especially not in all scenarios, use half the energy of a 7800 X3D. I just kind of threw that number out there because its TDP is almost half that, what the official TDP is for the 7800 X3D. I know, TDP does not equal power consumption. I'm sure there's already 10 of those in all caps in the comments. But it is, on paper, they're saying it has half the TDP, and we still don't know a lot about Zen 5's efficiency. In fact, I was talking to Carbon Crying Carry No Sugata today. This is one thing that AMD hasn't talked about. There's almost literally no slide talking about Zen 5 efficiency versus Zen 4. And yet we have public statements from their people at AMD that we talked about in the last news episode where they're like, yeah, I don't know, the 9700X just doesn't need a 120 or 170 watt TDP. So they're acting like it in interviews, like it uses significantly less power. They're giving half the TDP on paper to some of these products so far, unless I saw rumors they would change that. So I don't know. I guess my point, QH Freddy, is I don't think we should underestimate that Zen 5 may have a bunch of efficiency tweaks and features to it that AMD just hasn't talked about yet. Because again, much like X3D overclocking, which we'll get to later in the video or in the podcast, and or any other, or their aggressive pricing, this might be just another way they're like sandbagging. Like, actually think about that. They showed off Strix and didn't mention efficiency at all. There wasn't a single slide saying this much more efficient than Meteor Lake or Hawkpoint. I feel like that's odd.
Well, no, that's definitely odd. I mean, the other way to interpret that, which that would be bad, is if it's not very power efficient. But
if it doesn't really improve efficiency at all, which, hey, I've talked to some people who are like, maybe it isn't that much more efficient. So,
or maybe it will, like what they seem to be emphasizing is that it's going to be hitting the boost clocks more often. So maybe it's going to be could be using similar energy, but hitting those boost clocks more often, which would still be better energy, would still be more efficient, I suppose, just in a backwards way.
But I guess I do want to point this out too, to QH Freddy, because when I was looking at performance of like the 7800 X3D, like in part of the write-up that I like kind of glossed over, he says the 9600X will have to have 33% higher performance per core to match the 7800 X3D. I don't know where you're getting that number from. At least the tech spot, or hardware and box review on the 7800 X3D, I have it as 16% faster than the 9600X at gaming. So if we consider that this is supposed to have 16% more IPC than Zen 4, that already gets you to close to the 7800 X3D in gaming. And then consider that the boost clock, the max boost clock on the 9600X is a little higher than that of the 7600X. So I'm not suggesting that I think the 9600X will beat the 7800 X3D in gaming on average, nor that it will be tied. But on paper, it could be in some reviews, right?
Well, yeah. Do you mean 9700X or do you mean 9600X?
96. 7800 X3D was only 16% faster into the day one review.
Yeah. Okay. I mean,
so add 16% IPC to the 9600X, add higher max boost clocks.
Yeah.
I don't think it will beat it, but I would be surprised if it wasn't within 5% of the performance. And so all I'm saying is, QH Freddy, was I hyperbolic? Yeah, I just kind of threw out half the power because the TDP was half as much or almost half as much. But I don't think it's insane to suggest that the 9600X will be at least within 5% of the gaming performance of the 7800 X3D. Again, I'm not claiming some source here. I'm just saying on paper, this is what it suggests. And with that, then you look at the TDP being half as much and you go, it would not surprise me if in a lot of scenarios, the 9600X uses 20 to 40% less per power than the 7800 X3D. Do I think it will most of the time? No, but it might actually be a lot more efficient than you think, especially in terms of frames per watt. But there's no way to be sure. For all we know, it'll just use the same amount of power. But I doubt it. Or why would they give it a 65 watt TDP? They don't have to. They can give it 120. No one would care.
Yeah, I mean, when they're competent. Well, I guess we don't know what the head-to-head competition is going to claim for their TDP yet. But
I mean, AMD's, it's usually somewhat close, and like what cooling you need based on the TDP rating. No, with Intel, it's you can kind of just ignore what they say the TDP
by
is.
2 to 3, depending on the application and CPU.
But yeah, I thought that was an important correction to put out there because they did throw around half the power a lot, and I don't know. I don't think it's going to use half the power for the same performance next gen. But I do think people may be underestimating in what scenarios it is more efficient and how close it might get in performance to X3D Zen 4. All right, well, I say let's just move on then to the first story here. Story number 1, AMD Strix launch pushed back. Going here from Notebook Check and then moving on with some editorialization. Multiple retailers and industry insiders had zeroed in on a mid-July release date for AMD's Strix Point laptops. But then Golden Pig package upgrade, a renowned Weibo leaker, has now been pushed back by 2 weeks. And therefore, we won't get to see Strix Point powered laptops in action until July 28th. Meanwhile, I'll say I've heard the same thing from my retailer contacts. And also, Best Buy's own website now says July 28th. So I think we can confirm that the release date has been pushed back. And now for the reasons why AMD would push back Strix Point's release date, consider the following. So at first, AMD may have wanted to launch Strix as close to the X Elite as possible in case reviews for it were impressive. They'd want to get something out there right away, but they really weren't impressive. As leaked by this channel, early sales are pretty bad, reviews are mixed, and although I do actually hear sales for the X Elite are picking up a little bit right now, no retailer I spoke to today, which I did speak to before we started recording, told me that they're picking up massively. Mm-hmm. And so it's not like it's a giant sales success. So I don't think AMD needs to rush to compete with this, really. And also, Lunar Lake isn't scheduled to hit store shelves until later this year, or maybe even early 2025. Who knows if other recent reports that have come out I've read are accurate. Additionally, a Strix engineering sample was recently benchmarked on a blog, and it performs really impressively, yielding desktop CPU performance and dedicated GPU-like performance. So it looks impressive. Seems to be no doubt that this is going to crush the X Elite and beat Lunar Lake. But it was noted in this review that it seems like the mobile version of Zen 5 doesn't seem to have the latest AVX 512. It seems to have AVX 512 acceleration that's actually in line with what Zen 4 had. And when you combine that with the fact that Zen 5 desktop should boost much higher, would you really want there to be 2 weeks of all Zen 5 reviews being the weaker implementation? I mean, think about it. AMD doesn't need to worry about any competitor matching Strix total performance for a long time, possibly a year if we're being honest, or more. And Zen 5 desktop is going to be the top performer. So why not wait to have desktop models launch at the same time so you have the best reviews at the same time? Also, why not wait until you have a massive amount of day one volume? I heard there'd be good day one volume in the middle of July, but by the end of July, there'd be more options and a ton of volume. Why not just have a ton of volume on one day to get a bunch of good headlines if you have no competition? That's what I believe is going on with this pushback release. So what do you think, Dan?
I mean, yeah, I think the big missed opportunity they had was even just like a few more paper launches or preliminary reviews to deflate the X Elite's launch if they wanted to push it back, because there's no real, I guess there's not that much of a need to attack the X Elite because it did most of the work for itself. But
you know, one thing I have to point out though too, Dan, is I've heard that like X Elite supply hasn't really shown up until like this weekend, and like even some retailers are having trouble getting any notable amount of volume of the 32 gigabyte models. So
yeah, because I wasn't really looking to buy any of it, so maybe I missed this when the X Elite first came out. Were most of those models just available for pre-order still?
Yeah, I mean, if you looked really close, there were a couple that you could buy on day one, but most of them weren't coming until, again, this weekend. I think like June 28th is what I saw for a lot of them, and still a lot of them haven't arrived at like Best Buys and Micro Centers I've talked to. So they don't have them. So maybe AMD's looking around and going, they didn't get great reviews, and if people want to buy them, there aren't a lot of them. So we don't need to rush this at all.
Yeah, well, and I guess I'm it doesn't seem like it's hard to find a model of them in stock either. So if they're not selling a lot and there's not that many available, I think that speaks to there's not really any enthusiasm from consumers about this thing.
I want to be clear. I have heard sales are picking up a bit from the first week. But again, I talked to multiple retailers today. Everyone told me sales have picked up a bit, but it's still a trickle. It's really not. It's doing maybe a little better than when Meteor Lake Paper launched. Like every day someone comes into a large Best Buy, for example, and buys one. There is someone who comes in and buys one. But it's not really changing if AMD and Intel sell. Although I did get told that more often it seems like Intel's going down in sales than AMD versus this, especially with the new Hawkpoint de facto price drops that we've noticed. Like it's really easy for one person told me on a show floor to sell an AMD one over a Qualcomm one now that you can get Hawkpoint for like $900.
Although this type of talk does make me like, you know how in elections they have exit polls, like for people that are leaving, they poll like who did you vote for, why, all of that. It'd be kind of nice. I wish we had that same thing for like tech hardware. Like, so you bought an X Elite, why? Or just to like, you know, see what's motivating people to buy certain hardware.
Yeah, I'm trying to, like, if I pull up, like, let me look at one conversation I had today here with a contact. I mean, one person told me there is some interest in the X Elite because a lot of people are coming in, and when they see Qualcomm, they think smartphone battery life. And
okay, that makes sense.
so they're buying it, but it's not a lot of people. It is happening to some degree, and it does seem to be mostly eating into Intel sales.
Okay, and I doubt I have to think that would be a relatively small niche of people, because I don't know. The comments, I guess, will probably disagree with me, but enthusiasm about smartphone hardware just doesn't seem to be nearly as existent for other hardware spaces. So I just feel like there aren't going to be as many Qualcomm nerds as there are Intel, AMD, Nvidia
looking for
nerds.
A laptop, you mean?
Yeah, especially there.
I just think these things cost too much. I think especially when I hear people are coming in and they're like, "Oh, it's Qualcomm. Oh, so I'll get the battery life of my phone, right?" That's the type of person that probably wants to spend $800 on a laptop, I think. And I can't help but wonder, like, and then they come in and they're like, "Oh, so this will get me a smartphone like battery life." And they're like, not really, but it is pretty dang good. It's actually generally the best battery life right now. And they're like, "Okay, and it's $1,500. Are you?" And then they go, "Can this game?" And then someone just walks over, "No, but this, Lenovo Hawkpoint laptop can, and it costs $800, and actually it can game like a console." And
because
they're walking out with Hawkpoint and ignoring Intel.
It is just annoying with the X Elite, because I think there is a good market for that laptop. For, I don't know, students that are trying to save money, something like that would be perfect for a laptop like this, because don't need it to do everything perfectly, but you need it for writing notes, browsing while you're in class. And when I say browsing, like looking stuff up, I mean, I think all that X Elite's great for that. If you could sell it for $700-800 and it has battery life for, I don't know, the 5 classes you have that day, if you have a heavy day, that sounds like a great great market. But unfortunately, they're selling it for $1,300 plus.
Yeah, I mean, well, $1,200 plus, I guess. But
yeah, sorry, yeah. There's some
you're
models
so wrong, Dan.
There's some models that are like $1,250 or something, or maybe there is one that's $1,200.
There is one that's $1,200. Okay. But the problem is then they go, okay, well, this is $1,200, and it has only 16 gigabytes of RAM, and it can't really game at all. Or, I mean, and not just game. I mean, there were some content creation apps where it was crashing in. That is just where you lose it. Like, for the person that wants that battery life but isn't looking for the high performance, they're not going to spend that much. The second you go over $1,000, I'm sorry. I know people say casual this, that. Once you go over $1,000, I think most people go, it has to have a special feature or be able to run my games. Or why am I spending $1,000? I hear it from my mom all the time, or some of my friends that don't want a laptop for gaming. They'll say, "Well, I don't want to use it for gaming, so I don't want to spend over $800." And I'll go, you can get gaming for under $800 or premium non-gaming above that, but that is how they tend to think, is why would I spend this much if it isn't doing some high performance task?
Yeah, I don't. We've hammered that to death. It's just that trying to position the X Elite against Apple just makes no sense to me, because the things that people tend to praise Apple for editing, doing like art stuff, like digital art stuff, it just seems like the X Elite specifically is bad at most of that stuff.
In some apps it's good if it's meant to be used with it, but again, the way I think about it is I use some mainstream apps that other people use, but I use some apps that I just like for myself, and I can promise you they haven't been optimized for the X Elite.
Yeah.
And I think everyone is like that. It probably uses some random app that isn't one of the mainstream ones, and why have the doubt about that, so all right, Benjamin's writes in and says, any idea of if or when Strix would come to AM5? And this one I actually put a lot of thought into as well, because in terms of volume, I can't see AMD sending any truly significant volume of Strix to desktop this year. They want to take laptop market share. But actually, I thought about this. If they're making a ton of Strix, and I'm told they are, maybe they would have a lot of yields that aren't, not a lot in terms of percentage wise, but more. If they're making twice as much Strix, even if only 10% of them aren't efficient enough to really be a decent laptop model, that's still double what it probably, in terms of total volume, that it was with Phoenix. And so it wouldn't surprise me, actually, if, and again, I don't think you're going to see the best yields sent to desktop at any numbers this year, but it would not surprise me if this holiday season they actually do have some slightly cut down models at launch, just because they have so many to get rid of because they're making so much Strix. And I do hear that AMD really is sick of the $200 GPU market. And I was looking around at the performance of Strix and comparing it to some things, and I think it's going to perform like 30 to 50% faster than a 1650. What that means, especially, and by that I mean especially like a 95 watt desktop model that's allowed to be pushed, I think for $400 a 10 core, APU, like a 9850G, it's the equivalent of like a $200 or $300 CPU and a $200 graphics card. I think that's a solid offering by AMD. And then they can finally just go, you don't need a low-end GPU. Here's a 10 core. It games, as well as that game's better than an RX 580 or close to a 580 at least. Like, we're done. And this is just the yields that like Dell doesn't want to put in their $2,000 laptop. So we're just dumping them on desktop. I actually could see that happening this holiday season.
Yeah, it depends, because the sub $200 market's still like, at this point in time, I feel like having something that's as performant as like a 1650 wouldn't be that great. If it's all the way up to, if they could offer an APU that goes all the way like a little worse than a 3050, I think there would, which is what
this should be. Yeah,
I think there would be a very big market for that, or not necessarily very big, but a sizable enough market that it would make sense to release it. And this is the first time they've made an APU that I do truly feel like, even with just Strix Point, is going for entry level replacement performance. So yeah, I mean, I could see them pushing up bringing this to desktop than what they usually do, where they usually like, this is the desktop market is their overflow market for when they're running out of laptops to sell those CPUs with. Because like, I mean, general wisdom would be they probably release it like, I don't know, Q1 2026, but
well, if it followed one of those cadences, or just the middle of next year is what I would guess.
But yeah, I mean, if the GPU is good enough to really rival dGPU performance, even weak dGPUs, then yeah, there's definitely a reason to bring it earlier. Because I mean, go on to Reddit, a lot of people want to not spend $400 or $300 even on a GPU.
And you would be getting the equivalent of at least a $150 GPU that doesn't have the VRAM issues all low-end GPUs have. I actually think that would be something AMD should heavily market, that the benefit you're getting, again, if it was even just the 10 core, like they disabled 2 of the big cores, just 2 big, 8 little, whatever. And they're like, it's a 9850G and we're going to sell it for $400. Like, and even if it doesn't have the full AVX 512 that Zen 5 has, you're still probably looking at something that generally in multi-threading trades blows with the 9700X. Single threading slightly loses. And you're like, guess what though? Same performance for $100 more, you get a $150 GPU with unlimited VRAM. That's a real. I will warn though, if they do this, my suspicion would be they would have decent supply at launch, and then it will sell out, and then it will not be consistent when it's available. Because I think the point of it literally is to get rid of their extra bad yields. And if it sells okay, they'll probably have enough. If it sells really well, I think they'll say, "Hey, take them when they're available, man." Like, this is not the point.
That's always going to be what their laptop APUs are on the desktop market. Is the desktop market is a blow-off valve for them. So, I mean, yeah, that's always what it's going to be, limited availability. Maybe with something like the 8700G, that doesn't matter that much. I don't really know how hard it is to get a hold of an 8700G, but...
Oh, they're out there. I actually technically have one around here somewhere that I just received.
It's just... I get why it exists, but the niche for something like that is a lot smaller than for something like whatever they call the Strix desktop version, whether that be like the 9750G or whatever, or 9850G.
And like what I was hypothesizing was a $400 10 core, so 2 of the cores disabled with the full 16 compute units. It's also conceivable they could then have an 8 core with 12 CUs enabled. So these are just the bottom yields. They could sell it for $300 probably, and that would give you, probably slightly better than 1650 performance, like 1650 super-ish, like 570 performance. But again, unlimited VRAM, and it's $300. So you're getting, let's be honest here, or they probably do 330. You're getting an 8-core performance that's probably a little better than what Zen 4 was with an 8-core, except now you just, again, get a $120 graphics card. I think that'd be a very compelling product. Again, the only issue with this would be...
If you play is GTA 5 and CSGO, that thing would be a beast for in a machine for like $550.
Yeah. Although I would have to remind everybody, though, that the one downside would be is it seems like they're actually maybe reducing the amount of PCIe lanes included on Strix. So this would be a situation where, just remember, if you do get this as a starter APU, which is I think how most people would think about it, I start my build, get a decent motherboard like B650, B650E, or 850, I guess, soon. And then you throw in this thing that games like, Polaris, but without VRAM issues, and it can technically ray trace. And you're going to have to remember, though, if you do get a graphics card for it eventually, it's going to be running at x8 PCIe 4.0. And I believe it would only then have room for another, maybe 2 SSDs.
Oh.
So you would be losing that. Or if it can do more, I'm guessing you can probably run them at x2 PCIe to actually save maybe put a third one in or something. I don't know. But so you would have that compromise there. But again, if you're trying to save money, I can't imagine x8 PCIe 4.0 is probably going to be fine for the overwhelming majority of things. And then later you can just, get Zen 6 if you want to. It would still be probably the best way to go about it. And I think it should be something that AMD would want to market heavily, actually.
Yeah, but I would say with stuff like that, just from like a purchasing recommendation point of view, like if you're getting like a starter APU to save money more up in the future, and you're spending more on that CPU than you would have on another one, I almost just think you should, if you can, save money for like another couple months and just build the PC then. But
it also depends on, if you're waiting for a specific generation of graphics cards, or if you need this now. Like, what if you need this now and you only have this much money in your bank account and like you use this, so you need it? I could see that justification there. But again, it all comes down to price. If it's $400 for something that is a CPU, like a $300 CPU and a $200 GPU, yeah, you're saving $100 and it is incredibly efficient. But the second it would go over that, I'd start going, no, silly. But all right, let us now move on to story number 2. Massive AMD Strix launch supply leaked. For years, AMD has cautiously grown their presence in laptops. They perhaps had too much respect for the dynamics of the laptop market, in fact, where customers are usually less informed and OEM relationships are crucial. But while they promised increased supply with every generation since at least Rembrandt, and they often did have more supply, their market share has gone up, at least it was still obvious that the increase they were giving us was nowhere near enough to satiate either their customers or what their OEMs wanted. Actually, if one thinks to prior AMD APU launches, you could argue that Hawkpoint didn't really have decent volume until late Q1 or really Q2, so weeks after they said it launched. And Phoenix and Rembrandt were even worse, especially in the case of Rembrandt. I'm sorry, I don't think Rembrandt really launched until like half a year to 3 quarters after they said it was out. You could easily buy one. And I would say Phoenix took at least a quarter or two, maybe a half a year to be readily available as well. Well, that does not seem to be the case with Strix. I'm hearing that this thing actually will have a real launch in July, and maybe the biggest launch AMD's ever had to laptops in their company's history, as leaked in a video a couple of weeks ago. Now, sure, it is delayed a couple of weeks, as we've covered in the first story, but that doesn't change anything about what was told in that video. If anything, actually, it just means that day one supply should be even better than I was told it would be 2 weeks prior to, now where it's going to come out. This launch window could be AMD's last easy opportunity to truly explode their market share as well. So this would make sense. They're competing with Intel's underwhelming Meteor Lake APUs currently. And at this point, also a lot of inefficient and ancient Raptor Lake laptops. And Lunar Lake will at best compete with lower end, lower core count models of Strix, while the X Elite has the marketing. Reality hit that hype like a truck. However, next year, we will see Intel return to high-end laptop. With Arrow Lake and X Elite might resolve its issues and start performing how it was supposed to. Things can get worse, therefore. And so AMD needs enough volume to conquer as much market share as they can right now, showing OEMs that they can provide the volume they need and increasing their brand visibility in the laptop space. Right. So yeah, that was a video that I put out, of course, like a couple weeks ago, that everyone I talked to in retail and distribution was floored at how many laptops are being shipped by AMD for an actual launch date. What do you think about that, Dan?
Well, I mean, yeah, we've talked about this too. Like, yeah, this is AMD's opening in the market to really break in. If the X Elite had been a little bit better, that would have weakened AMD. But with the X Elite being pretty meh, especially for the fact that they're going to be competing for similarly priced GPUs, I think at the lower, laptops at least at the lower end for Strix. Yeah, they have a really big opening here, and if they can't capitalize on it, you're going to see all of those OEMs lean more into Qualcomm next generation, I think, because AMD has been competitive with Intel with their CPUs for what? Like
honestly,
four generations
since Zen Plus.
So what is it? Like that's 3 or 4 generations, right? And yeah, they really need to. They keep showing us year after year, look how awesome our laptop CPUs are. And everybody agrees every year. Yep, those are really cool, AMD.
Where can I buy one?
I could buy one.
Yeah.
So yeah, AMD, they better be working with partners to actually get models with their laptop models with their CPUs, or just APUs without a dedicated GPU in them out there. Because yeah, you can put out as many products as you want that are great on paper, that have some level of availability, but it doesn't matter unless you can buy them.
And again, I think this really is so important to point out that right now we are hot off the heels of OEMs being furious with how Meteor Lake turned out. Just furious. I mean, the stuff I heard, we covered that to death, of course, late last year. And so they want more options, so much so that they're willing to sell non-working APUs for $1,500 from Qualcomm that can't even boot half of the games out there, and like a quarter of professional apps. I mean, that's how desperate they are. I mean, I think there was a quote. I don't remember if it was public or it was like just a statement given in an email to someone at Tom's Hardware or something. But it was like, I think someone at Microsoft said, our goal with the X Elite is to get those damn Intel stickers off of our laptops. I mean, stuff like that being said by Microsoft. They're desperate for anything but Intel. A lot of OEMs are. Qualcomm's not lived up to their expectations, and in the meantime, I really could, and we said this when the X Elite came out in that podcast, I could see Qualcomm APUs aging well in a way that Alchemist never did. I could see the software get there next year, and I could see a follow-up be pretty good, and there will be Panther Lake, which, well, I'll talk about that probably more in this episode. I talked to someone about that today, but right now there's nothing, and all eyes are on them, so if they have a day where you can buy one from tons of different models and they work perfectly. Again, that's why the delay makes sense, and it just makes sense to just supply everything to this.
Yeah, I mean, this is their highest stakes launch at this point, so it better go well.
I mean, I straight up think that a big reason they canceled big RDNA 4 is so they could just focus on this, and as we'll get to later, probably Strix, Halo, and Medusa. Like, they're like, we're done. We are focusing on this. We're going to do like 2 APUs a year, and we're not going to be supply constrained because this is the time when people want better APUs. So we're going to make sure they can buy them. And then we'll do RDNA 5, yada, yada, yada.
I mean, yeah, if they're looking for a consumer market that has the potential for making a ton of money that they're already making products for, it's laptops. So yeah, I mean, sure, there's a group of people that really like AMD graphics cards. I mean, I've owned mostly AMD graphics cards.
Technically, I'm using one right now in a backup system. Works fine.
True. But yeah, people are far more enthusiastic about their CPUs. If you can only focus on one, focus on that.
All Jesse wants is for Maurice to play with her more often. But unfortunately, he just does not give out playtime or kisses for as low of a rate as she does. And I think she's just going to have to deal with that. But do you know what you don't have to deal with? Paying too much for Microsoft software if you go to CDkeyoffer.com. This piece of content is sponsored by CDkeyoffer.com and their back to school sale. Whether it's Microsoft operating systems, Office products, or even many of the latest games, CDkeyoffer.com provides PC gamers with a product this community deserves. Amongst endlessly elevating component costs, fair pricing on Microsoft keys is one thing that we at least should get, I think. And you know, the Moore's Law is Dead team has been working with CDkeyoffer.com for a very long time. And that's because they're good to me, good to Dan, good to about a dozen family members of friends of mine that have used their services. And they've been really, really good, most importantly, to the Moore's Law is Dead community. So support this channel by using offer code BrokenSilicon to save 25% off Microsoft software, or you can also use Die Shrink to save 3% off everything else on the website like games. Using either of those codes really helps the channel a ton, and it helps save you money. So use those codes BrokenSilicon and Die Shrink at CDkeyoffer.com today. Melodic Warrior writes in, and he says, welcome back. Oh, I believe this was submitted after we got back from the vacation. What do you think of the messaging that is coming out of AMD recently? With all the keynotes that happened recently, I got the sense that AMD was the only one with confidence in their product launches. In some ways, it almost was like a declaration of war on their competitors. They said phrases like, you will see Zen 5 everywhere, and mention of how many product stacks in various industries they have launched are leading me to believe they are entering a new phase in their sales strategy. There's a note here for Carbon Cry that says, well, if you want confidence, how about the company that said we're going to power 50% of Windows PCs by ARM in 5 years? Yes, that was quite a statement there.
I would say from, Qualcomm's side, they were overconfident based on the product they were launching. And maybe Melodic Warrior was just reading that, is forgetting about the confidence because the reviews were pretty lackluster. But Qualcomm, I think, is going to keep going for the market. I agree with Carbon Cry on that note.
No, it's just I think Carbon Cry is just pointing out it's ridiculous. They think they could get to half of 50% market share in 5 years. I mean, what are you smoking?
Well,
AMD's taking 5 years to get to 35.
I don't think they're going to do it, but I think they're making as big of a push as they can to try to accomplish that.
Yeah. But anyways, I think the point is, I think I noticed the same things Melodic Warrior did. Like when they announced Strix, they're like, and we talked about this, they're like basically saying things like, if you want the best, you have to get this. It's going to be about software, not hardware, because everyone's going to use our hardware if they want the best. I don't know. I would say AMD seems exceedingly confident right now in their CPUs, and they probably have good reason to be so.
I mean, they have a lot of reasons to be confident over their competition. Intel, because Intel just can't perform, and Qualcomm because, Qualcomm doesn't really have much to compete with yet. I mean, to compete against them yet.
But you mentioned them, so let's get to this next story here with story number 3. Leaks point to Lunar Lake improving greatly over Meteor Lake. Now, quoting here, translated quoting from 3D Center. Twitter user Jkin, who is, to be clear, a very new leaker and thus unproven, I believe this was actually the person's first post on Twitter, added to other leaked Lunar Lake benchmarks, with one also showing different power settings. So basically, 3D Center took these new things out of we can't say we're sure about it, but took some stuff from this person on Twitter that leaked stuff, and then took other leaked Lunar Lake and Strix and Hawkpoint, and Hawkpoint wouldn't be a leak. We just have the information, stuff, and put them all together in different tables. While SKU core count and iGPU configurations are not always specified, the leak does show results with both 30 watts, but also 17 watts for Lunar Lake. The Time Spy results specifically looked good with the 17-watt configuration of Lunar Lake, competing with a Strix Point 15-watt leak, and then the 30-watt version also basically tied Strix point at a higher TDP. Now, we don't know what it was. The highest it could be is 54. For all we know, it's 35, 45, but it was similar. So Lunar Lake was showing to be tying Strix in single threading, and then also being around 15 to 20% below Hawk point in multi-threading, which is roughly what we should expect. So yes, this unverified leak points to Lunar Lake having solid CPU performance scaling to 17 watts and GPU results similar to the fastest Meteor Lake GPU, which is impressive at 17 watts, considering that Meteor Lake model would be consuming, I think, at least triple the energy to get to the same performance. That looks really good. But that's why I wanted to bring all of this up. Even though the results, we can't be sure that all of these are legit. It's because I have been seeing some odd celebrations around them. So let's assume they are legit. I think they could be. And let's just actually point some things out here. Lunar Lake, based on this leak, if true, would represent a massive improvement over Meteor Lake. But if we're being honest, Intel does tend to overperform in time spy. Like, for example, I believe here it showed Meteor Lake beating, if I remember it right, like Hawk Point by 20%. That is not what you see on average in gaming benchmarks between Hawk Point and Meteor Lake. So an average gaming result compared to this, you might want to add 20% to the AMD results. Furthermore, Lunar Lake seems to have tied the 890M in Strix at 15 watts and likely around 30 watts as well. But I mean, you know, that's not really saying much considering how much more compute is actually in that graphics tile for Lunar Lake. And if you compare it to Hawk Point, this would suggest that, I mean, let's add it up. Lunar Lake would win against Hawk Point in single threading by 15%, but lose in multi-threading by 15%, and probably have similar GPU performance, maybe a narrow victory. So it almost looks more like a Hawk Point competitor in that regard. It does look a lot better than Meteor Lake, but I have to say, before you celebrate, these results perfectly line up with the Fox's testing at Computex that showed Lunar Lake trading blows with Hawk Point and heavy workloads at the same power. It looks like it probably, unless Strix doesn't have an efficiency increase, won't be as efficient as Strix, even at 15 watts. And 15 watts, that's the entire niche Lunar Lake is trying to dominate. So what did you think about this, Dan?
I mean, I think like in an earlier version of this, it looked like this could suggest that it might be like the next handheld.
The earlier version of the notes. Yeah.
This could be the next big handheld thing. And, you know, I agree with that. This doesn't sound bad to me necessarily. If it's good at low power, has pretty good graphics at low power, great, throw it in those. But, I mean, if it's slightly better, if it's better single threading than Hawk Point, and
you can look at the charts as well, or
yeah,
I'll send you. Okay,
if it's better than single threading than at Hawk Point and worse multi-threading, that sounds like the CPU is almost a generation behind, or if not a full generation behind AMD at this point when it comes to
total performance. That's why I emphasize total performance.
Or if you want to split the difference, because, well, it's probably roughly in line with where Strix is, or maybe just a little behind where Strix is in single threading. Okay, then it's half a generation behind. Great. And then its iGPU is on par with Strix Point's iGPU, which I don't think is all that shocking either, because neither of their iGPUs were really at any point significantly better than either. So, like, yeah, Lunar Lake having a decent iGPU,
that was the entire point.
Yeah, not a shock. And it will have a niche, and Lunar Lake might not completely suck. It's just, its niche is low power, which that's fine.
Yeah, but like, let me pull up this chart for myself again too, because if I look at GPU performance here, I just think this is worth pointing out. Yeah, it's like 20% better. Lunar Lake's 17 watt score is about 20% better than what you would get with a 780M, and this is technically the Phoenix 780M though. So so no, I would say that and Time Spy and Intel tends to overperform in relative to other games. So this is compared to Phoenix 20%. To me, that suggests it's about Hawk Point iGPU performance in gaming, but in compute, it's probably as good, or it's probably better than Strix. I mean, think of this too. The total tops in Lunar Lake, they're advertising as 120 tops, whereas with Strix, I don't know, I think it's somewhere between 70 and 80 something tops. Right. Well, think about that. That means all of that compute in the graphics card of Lunar Lake is still only resulting in gaming performance of an AMD GPU that's way smaller and more efficient at turning, teraflops into gaming performance. That's what that would suggest to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Again, there's two ways to look at this. If you only compare this to Meteor Lake, you go, all right, well, we're looking at something that's going to perform, at least I would guess, let me see here, 20% probably better in gaming than Meteor Lake. And then in constrained scenarios, which Meteor Lake is famously horrible at from what I've seen in the Fox's testing with handhelds, and what everyone's seen with MSI Claw reviews, in constrained TDPs, Lunar Lake seems to be like 3 times more efficient than Meteor Lake. That's great. But the problem is if you then compare it to AMD and you go, kind of seems like Hot Point with a better NPU and performance, but also way better compute capabilities. I don't know. To me, it kind of sounds like if you just took Strix and disabled a few cores, you got Lunar Lake for most scenarios.
Yeah. So, I mean, to me, I keep saying I want to see Intel successfully execute on multiple launches. I don't think Lunar Lake's going to be the performance king unless something that's popping up in the leaks. Is it popping up in the leaks? But if they understand what this product is, release it, put it in the models it should be in, and release it with decent volume. Good job, Intel. You successfully executed on one of your on something that you developed. So Lunar Lake has the potential to be what I would personally consider to be a good product, even if it's not necessarily going to be beat Strix. Because if it's marketed and placed in the correct products, it's not a competitor to Strix.
It kind of, to me, seems like a far better and more successful launch of something like the X Elite, actually, which, again, everyone's acting like all of these things are competing. No. The Strix has 12 cores and 24 threads. Lunar Lake has 8 threads total, people. It was never meant to be a Strix competitor. The only reason Intel's pretending it is because they fucked up with their evolution of TOPS and the NPU performance. And so they know that they need to make it seem like they have a cutting edge APU that has similar NPU performance to AMD, even though, let's be honest, I don't know if they really do need to, but that's what all people are talking about now is AI. So they feel like they have to act like it's a Strix competitor. It's not. It's what it really would excel at is if they can get it into $900 to $1,200 laptops that don't have dedicated GPUs, which seems like most of Strix is coming with dedicated GPUs, which is really annoying. And they're like, hey, look, this is like RTX 3050, maybe even RTX 3060 Max Q. Probably not, but something like that gaming performance. And you don't need a GPU. It's $1,200. Yeah, we know there's a Strix one for $1,600 that comes with a 4060, but 3060 Max Q or 4060, and you get half the battery life. I do think Lunar Lake could do very well there, but that is what they got to do with it. They cannot pretend this belongs in $2,000 laptops because it's competing with something with 3 times the threads.
Yeah, and then at that point, at that price, what it's competing with, stupidly from Qualcomm's perspective, is it's competing with the X Elite. And yeah, I think a product that actually works in every app is a
better.
Even if the X Elite ends up beating it in a few applications, I would rather just have the thing that consistently works.
And it's funny. I think I'm now realizing I'm going to be saying the same thing I said about the Meteor Lake launch. What are you watching? Do the drivers work at launch? Mm-hmm. That is what I'm going to be looking for here, because you can show me a time spy score. I just want to know, on average, does this thing just launch every single game? Because if they can actually nail the drivers at launch this time with Meteor Lake and prove that at least the tile version of Battle Mage is worth gaming on, I could see recommending Lunar Lake around $1,200 to a lot of people that just want what you need in a snappy PC with decent battery life if you don't want a GPU. And in fact, maybe they could occupy the market that AMD could be occupying, but doesn't seem to be yet, where they all have dGPUs. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. We said something positive about Intel finally, Tom.
We say positive things about Intel all the time, people. I mean, come on. Let me see. QH Freddy writes in and he says, say Skymont didn't increase performance per core over Crestmont, but instead let Intel cram 50% more E-cores into their SoCs. Assuming similar area and power efficiency to what they made now with Lunar Lake and Arrow Lake, would you have considered that more, less, or equally impressive? Also, heck, what if instead of 50% more cores, they doubled core counts? But again, it doesn't have that higher performance per core that we're getting with Skymont. Sorry for the long message and have a great day. So I thought about this. Skymont, despite, if you actually read closely the slides for what the performance uplift will be, and actually let me put down a note here to put this on screen here. Like, everyone keeps acting like Skymont's like doubling IPC or something. No, if you go from Skylake or Comet Lake to Raptor Lake, that's like a 30% IPC increase. So Skymont it's a large increase, but it's a believable one for an architecture that's this old and getting a huge update. So what they've accomplished with Skymont is 25 to 35% faster, or should I say better IPC than Crestmont/Gracemont, but no increase in core counts. Honestly, if they did 50% more cores, meaning now Lunar Lake has six E-cores, 10 cores total, and Arrow Lake would have 24 E-cores, I would consider that a better situation for Lunar Lake because you kind of want more than 8 threads at this point. But for Arrow Lake, for most users, I don't think it would be as good because you probably want, once you get over like 16 threads or so, some apps have diminishing returns. Actually, a lot of apps do have diminishing returns. And I would say 8 plus 24 wouldn't be as good. Now, if they went to 32, so you're telling me Arrow Lake would be 8 plus 32, same power consumption as if it was 8 plus 16. Yeah, I think that would be more impressive, obviously, because maybe single threading didn't go up, but they doubled multi-threading performance gen over gen at same power. I think that's more impressive than them, upping single threading by 35, single and multi-threading by 35 to 50% in one generation at same power.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from a technical standpoint, it would be more impressive, but I do really want to see them prove in either scenario the usefulness of their E-cores, because once again, their E-cores in a lot of ways do seem to just be wasting energy that could be directed at the P-cores. But
yeah, well, I mean, now they're going to have to be. We've talked about this. Lunar Lake only has 4 P-cores. Those E-cores will be half. They will need to be doing half the work, and with Arrow Lake, it's going to have to work much more flawlessly, and it basically worked before. It's just it didn't seem to be better than the alternative. This is the generation Lunar Lake and Arrow Lake where they need to prove this works better. Ziki Phobia writes in and says, have you heard any updates on Panther Lake and Cougar Cove performance, efficiency, and timeline? Nope. I actually asked a contact today about this. Go back to my Intel leak from October of last year. I don't actually, I everything I was told lined up with what I was told by people about a year ago. So Panther Lake, 4 big cores, 8 little cores, 4 LPE cores. It will have better IPC. I expect a double-digit increase, but let's just, again, call it 8 to 16% higher IPC with Cougar Cove over Lion Cove in Arrow Lake.
Yeah.
It's a new architecture, but it's kind of like a Zen 3 to Zen 4. It's not a grounds up redesign, so don't expect a 20% IPC increase with it. And I don't know. And I don't know what the NPU will be in Panther Lake. I actually didn't ask about that, but my suspicion is it's when Intel recently talked in their earnings about up to double the AI performance, they meant combined tops, and probably the NPU in Panther Lake is like 60 to 80 tops would be my guess. And then the GPU is 50% better than before or more. So that's what I think is going on with Panther Lake. But that's really no different than what I told everybody last year. And maybe I'll do an update again soon. But yeah, I don't know. 4 plus 8. It's coming out late next year, I believe. So it'll be that much better. It really is. It's an evolution of Lunar Lake. This is still really not a Strix competitor.
I mean, no, that does not sound like a Strix competitor to me.
It's targeting 15 to 30 watts with 4 big cores and 8 little cores on Intel 18A. That's what it is.
Well, with hopefully their execution of LPE cores is better in Panther Lake than if half of the cores are LPE. Well, a third of the cores are LPE cores.
Yeah, I'll say this too, and who knows, maybe this week I'll do an Intel leak and actually say, because this does happen. I say these things, then sometimes some of my sources reach out to me and go, actually, something has changed. I should have told you earlier. So who knows? But One thing that surprises me a little is that I'm still hearing it has 4 LPE cores, because I like what they did with Lunar Lake, where they went from, what was it, 6 plus 8 plus 2 or 4, whatever it was, and no, plus 2. There's 2 LPE cores in Meteor Lake, I believe. And now they're just going 4 plus 4. The LPE cores are just good, so you can maybe turn off more of it.
Yeah, because Meteor Lake, I mean, from my perspective, the LPE cores were we
ruined it cores.
wasting your silicon cores. I mean,
yeah. You can only use the LPE cores if you want to save energy, except they're so slow that you would never want to do that because it would be sluggish as hell. But yeah, and so I find that a little surprising with Panther Lake that they would do 4 plus 8 plus 4. If I were to actually suggest what they should do, it should probably be like 6 plus 4, like 6 big, 4 little, so that then just have 4 little cores. Or maybe even 6 plus 6, actually. Yeah, that's probably what I would do, so that you can just use the little cores, but you still have a ton of big cores when you need them. But I don't know. It sounds like they may bring back the 3 different cores thing still. So I don't know. We'll see. But we should probably now move on to story number 4. Moore's Law said Ryzen 9000 pricing and X3D leak confirmed. This week, WCCF Tech seemingly confirmed that the 9000 X3D chips will come with overclocking. But why do we say seemingly? Well, there was no mention of the leak out of this channel that was weeks ago that said pretty much word for word everything they said in the WCCF Tech article. So unfortunately, I have to say, this opens up a very real possibility that the way WCCF Tech managed to learn about everything this channel leaked a few weeks ago was just finally getting around to watching the video and then not crediting it for whatever reason. That is the issue with not giving credit or mention. If WCCF Tech had independent sources and they mentioned Moore's Law is dead, that wouldn't suggest a motive to just say they heard it from someone else and lie. So I don't know. We don't really know if they received this information independently because of how similar it is. But they did also post 2 leaks for Ryzen 9000 pricing that would also broadly confirm what this channel leaked about Zen 5's aggressively low pricing as well. And they did show their sources on that one. First is cache information from Canada Computers. Then there's a Filipino retailer that listed parts but with no pre-order options, and a Slovenian retailer which also offered pre-order for the prices they list. However, the only truly big retailer in that list, if we're being honest, from a significant market is Canada Computers. They could have very well priced their preliminary pricing based their preliminary pricing on Moore's Law's Dead's information as well. And I know that sounds silly. I've seen it before. Retailers, I saw it actually a lot with like the PS5. They just looked at leaks for PS5 pricing and then had a placeholder. So to be clear, we can't be 100% sure about this, but this one seems more likely to be directly confirming what this channel leaked about Zen 5 pricing. So anyways, Hassan's pettiness aside, there's really nothing this channel can do about lack of credit but ask its fans to ask better from outlets that act like this. At a minimum, though, the fact that multiple retailers are listing similar pricing to what Moore's Law is Dead did, I would say suggests that the leaked pricing in that video is extra verified now, and so I think we should talk about it. So Dan, if AMD does have higher clocked X3D chips that you can fully overclock to standard Zen 5 clock speeds or close, and if the top chip, for example, the 9950X is priced between $600 and $650, what do you think about that? Because I do think we can't be sure, but it does seem like it's becoming more and more confirmed. How big of a deal do you think this could be?
I mean, yeah, if it were like 600, that would be a huge deal there. And I think they're really going for the market at that point because it's $100 below what they previously did. And I think 650 is more or less just them, is kind of them just pricing things how they should be, because it's not really it's not as big of an evolution. We're still on 16 cores for several generations now. At a certain point, I think they kind of need to just start lowering the prices of the prices per core versus what they've previously done. So 650, I think, is acknowledging the reality that 16 cores isn't as impressive as it used to be. And 600 is, I think, really going for the jugular of the market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and I continue to think like this is like, again, like that video that exclusively leaked this information weeks ago. I came to the conclusion that this is how they're sandbagging. They told us the rough performance. They told us what's coming out at first. But what they didn't, and so it looked like 15 to 20% higher performance for Zen 5. But then they conveniently leave out Yes, but because X3D this time will be clocked 10% or more higher than last gen, actually X3D to X3D now is maybe a 30% increase, totally in line with what happened with Zen 4 overall. And so we conveniently didn't tell our competitors that actually the peak performance is going to be better. And we also, guess what, guys? It's also like 20%, 30% cheaper than last gen. That's a huge deal.
Oh, yeah. And if X3D hits the same or is even within like a couple hundred megahertz of the non-X3D, I mean, I think versus their non-X3D counterparts, you might be looking at like 20, 25% higher performance.
I mean, if I look at the 7800 X3D right now, I think this thing boosts to 5. It says up to 5 gigahertz. And I thought I saw 5.1 before. So if they can boost to even 5.5, right. So now you have the 16% IPC increase and you have a 10% boost clock, 1.1 times that. You're getting to near a 30% performance increase. So that seems pretty much confirmed. And if they give all Vcache to that top model,
I mean, and if you don't really have to downclock it as a result of the Vcache, there's no real reason to
not to use it on both CCDs. Yeah. So I don't know. I think this is becoming more and more exciting here. And I got to remind everybody, when Zen 4 was first announced, they were ridiculous. They said greater than an 8% IPC increase and above 5 gigahertz clock speeds, which turned into 5.7. Yeah, it's above 5, dude. It's actually closer to 6 than it is to 5 gigahertz. I just can't help but not think there's something like that going on here where they're like, oh, we'll be aggressively priced and X3D will be better. And then they're just leaving out, it's going to be wildly better. And because actually X3D is launching at the same time as non-X3D, they kind of have to price everything lower. Like they kind of have to go for $600 for the 16 core so that the X3D version can be $700 or $750 or something.
Yeah.
And I guess let me now move on to this next part here, which is actually an ad from Micro Center. So once again, oh boy. Once again, Micro Center is sponsoring this podcast. And if you go to the description and click the links below, there's a bunch of stuff there. There's a $25 off all CPUs. So, I mean, I know they're selling the 7800 X3D for a ridiculous price with free RAM right now. You support the channel if you click this link, and even more if you use it. You can get another $25 off of that. They will have these promotions going when Zen 5 launches, I believe. So you'll be able to just get a new cutting-edge CPU and then get $25 off that as well. And they also just opened a new store in Charlotte, North Carolina. I believe if you go there, actually, let me make sure I have this right. They're giving you another 10% off as well. They have a deal going on with that. And they're also opening a new location in Miami as well. And if you click the links below, you can get early access to that. And I believe they will give you a 128 gigabyte flash drive. I did not want to have to issue a retraction on that. There's also a link below to shop their latest deals. And I don't know how much more there is to say really here, Dan, but I mean, you like Micro Center, right? I mean, it seems so silly.
Well, we will see if I go to Micro Center sometime in the next year to build a new Zen PC. 5 or something.
Yeah, it probably will. It honestly almost feels silly to like Micro Center as just because it's like, of course I recommend them, right, Dan?
Oh yeah, I mean, if you can drive to one, definitely get your parts from there because you'll be spending less money.
Like not just less, like $200, $300 less. Like it's actually worth the tank of gas even to go there. But maybe you won't have to drive as far anymore with the new stores at Charlotte and Miami. So again, check out those links below. Show support by doing that. And I mean, now's the time to build a new rig, I believe, even if GPUs are a little boring. And that means you should probably actually use these as well, whether it's buying cheaper Zen 4 hours, Zen 5 in a month. So, yep. Check out Micro Center today. Let us move on to story number 5 with AMD Zen 6 Medusa and 3nm Strix Halo leaked. Late Friday night, yours truly put out a Zen 5 Strix Halo and Zen 6 Medusa update that confirmed the following. Medusa is likely going to be used on desktop with Zen 6. Yes, but it is also likely to be a family of Zen 6 products that include points in Halo APUs as well. Additionally, Strix Halo seems to be using TSMC N3E, so the good 3 nanometer, for its I/O die, and therefore should impress even more than previously expected when it comes to performance and efficiency. That means that they're using 40 compute units of 3 nanometer RDNA 3.5. That's pretty exciting, actually. And finally, it kind of seems like Strix Halo, which will upgrade the NPU, GPU, and CPU over Strix Point, may just be the next generation of laptops. Launching only 6 to 10 months after Strix Point, the Medusa APUs should launch just 6 to 10 months after that. Now, no one told me that's going to happen, but I just have this suspicion that Strix Halo is just going to be a new generation. These conclusions were achieved after compiling older leaks from this channel, like looking at things I kind of glossed over, and then also looking at taking in newer information from sources I spoke with in the past week. And then I also connected the dots on what things are likely to really mean. Like, for example, Medusa, everyone seems like online assumed that just means a successor to Granite Ridge, which is Zen 5 Desktop, or is about to be Zen 5 Desktop. And everyone seemed to miss that Medusa and Mythology has wings. You know what also has wings? Phoenix and Strix. I mean, I'd say that directly suggests that this somehow is connected to a new APU platform, and I think it will maybe be like Meteor Lake. It seems clear to me that what's going on is AMD was always willing to go to chiplets with laptops. I was told that by some sources in the past week, that Strix Point, Strix Halo, these were all intended to be all 3 nanometer, actually, laptop chiplet APUs. And then TSMC got delayed because TSMC 3 nanometer got delayed. Because of that, they migrated Strix to a monolithic 4 nanometer design to get it to market as quickly as possible. But then they decided they still wanted the best performance for Halo, and so they had to wait. And when you consider that Strix Halo is coming out a year late and Strix Point's coming out half a year late, that again suggests it's not just Zen 5 issues. It's probably that they were waiting because they insist on using 3 nanometer. So yeah, to me, it seems like Strix Point will be followed by a new chiplet platform, that Strix Halo is actually kind of more similar to what Intel is trying to do with Meteor Lake and Arrow Lake. And then Medusa is going to launch maybe 6 to 10 months after that. So that means AMD, if you look at it, Hawk Point, Strix Halo, Medusa, and probably Halo and Point, AMD seems to be doing 4 generations of mobility in 2 years. And all of this could have dire ramifications for Intel going into 2026, with AMD fighting fire with fire and also adopting advanced packaging offerings for lower power consumption and more higher core counts and capabilities. Between chiplets with their economics of scale and silicon quality benefits, Intel's no longer going to have an advantage. Again, think about this. AMD is set to compete well with Intel's chiplet TSMC 3 nanometer Lunar Lake parts, despite using a monolithic 4 nanometer design. What do you think is going to happen when they're using chiplet 3 nanometer APUs? Well, we'll certainly find out early next year with Strix Halo. So yeah, Dan, what did you think about this? Actually, I thought this was a pretty huge leak.
I mean, yeah, it's with all of these delays, it's weird how all of them are going to crop up like this, and I think AMD is going to have an interesting time marketing all of Strix Halo 6 months after Strix Point comes out, because I think for the products it would have looked best, or it would have been a hell of a launch, I guess, if they had Strix Point and Strix Halo launching around the same time as one another. But yeah, I mean, with Medusa launching as like a fully tile-based platform that could be both desktop and laptop.
And I'm not 100% of that. That seems very likely, though.
I think it would be cool, and it would possibly present an avenue for a lot of more different, interesting products with a more unified, on a single unified platform between desktop and laptop. If that's the case, they're going full tile-based approach now, with that they can slot in with one another. That would be really cool. But I don't know. I mean, Medusa sounds like the natural evolution you would expect to come after Strix Halo, and I'm glad to hear that they're going full in on the Mega APU concept. They're finally freaking going in on the APU concept that people have wanted to exist for forever. Which, I mean, yeah, Strix Halo obviously is the first iteration of that, but a second generation of that confirms that, yeah, they're dedicated to something like that. And I don't know. Yeah, that could replace the low-end GPU, or hell, it's going to start even going into the mid-range GPU market at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when I when I want to talk about that, like why I think it could be another generation as well, because again, I think AMD's original intention, actually going back to like 2021, like 3 years ago, was they wanted by early 24 to launch first Strix Point 3 nanometer, then Strix Halo 3 nanometer, but they have different IO dies, I would assume. And then all those issues happen. My original Halo leak that broke this story was already a year and a half old, actually, which is funny. That one already showed 4 nanometer for the chiplet. So clearly they were already changing their plans then. But even back then, they wanted Strix Point to launch with like 20 tops, quarter one of 24, and then Strix Halo to launch with 40 tops, like quarter 2 or so, I think it was. So, but think about what that means. We know those slides that I leaked a year and a half ago have been corroborated. We know they were legit. AMD planned 4 nanometer Strix to have 20 tops, and then Strix Halo to have 40. We know Strix Point, though, has 50 tops. We know Hawk Point wasn't called Phoenix Plus. They changed to Hawk Point and beefed it up more. I can't help but look at that and go, there really could be some more changes under the hood to Strix Halo. And what's been like, if they went from 20 to 50 tops with Strix Point, why shouldn't we assume that Strix Halo might have 60 or 70 tops in its MPU? And from that perspective, you then go, well, if you're AMD, what's smartest? You have to wait till 2025 for 3 nanometer now. So are you really going to keep the design the same? Or are you going to take that and go, well, screw it. Let's just make it come out 7-8 months after Strix Point, and we'll call it AI 400. And who's going to say it's not worthy of being called that? We're going from 16 compute units to 40 compute units. 4 nanometer for the graphics portion to 3 nanometer for the graphics portion. We're going from 12 4 plus 8 cores to just all 16 big cores, and we can put Vcache on them. Like, I mean, yeah, I think they would actually be stupid to not call it a new generation. And once you realize that, you go, shit, maybe that's why they changed the naming scheme, because they're going to be doing 2 generations a year for 2 or 3 years. They can't stick to the yearly naming scheme. They're doing more than that.
Well, I mean, they can if they want to, but then the next desktop line is going to be the like 13,000 series or something. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're going to be dedicated to the AI hundreds things for their laptops in perpetuity or not. But I mean, if they're going to be jumping between generations this quickly on laptop, yes, they need to figure out some way to distinguish all of them.
Now, let me check one thing here too. This is why I want to point this out too. I think AMD is doing what Intel did when they crushed them out of the market too. If you actually look at it, the Sandy Bridge came out Q4 of 2011. Ivy Bridge came out Q2 of 2012, and then Haswell came out Q2 of 2013. Like, that was when Intel really shut AMD out of laptop, was pretty much Sandy Bridge. They were already dominating, but that's when they really shut them out. They had a new line of next-gen laptops with way better graphics, way better efficiency every 6 to 12 months, not every 2 years. And I think that's what AMD is going to try to do to Intel over the next 2 years. You can see the same cadence Intel did in Intel 1.
Well, I mean, that's how you really start building like gains over the other company, is when one company gets into a position where they just have a release cadence that's 50% faster than their competitor, but they're not compromising on like the increase in performance they get. Like, yeah, if gen over gen their release cadence is 20 to 50% faster, but they're true generational leaps, then yeah, they're going to be lapping Intel at that point.
Yeah, and I guess I won't do a leak slide for this, but I will say this to people as well. Maybe this will be in a video next week. I am hearing that Navi 31 and 32 production is winding down potentially. Why would they do that? What else might they want to use 3D packaging, 2.5D packaging for in 6 months? I think there's a good argument to be made here that AMD is preparing to wind down RDNA 3, chiplet RDNA 3 production, wind up RDNA 4, monolithic, just Navi 31 performance, but cheaper, and we don't have to use all these fancy assembly lines anymore. And then right when that happens, boom, tons of Halo supply. I think that's what's going on here. I think it's very obvious. And I've really dwelled on the Strix part of it on this one because I think for that video I talked about Medusa for most of it, but I think that could be its own story. It's just, guys, Strix Halo is 3 nanometer RDNA 3.5, and it looks like they might even be able to fit it on AM5. Again, Dan, that's another thing I heard as well that I talked about is a couple of sources, not one, a couple said that it kind of seemed like Strix Halo was just for laptop, but at some point, especially at least with Medusa, they went, can we just use denser nodes and maybe make it 10% smaller so we can barely fit it on AM5? Then we just have one platform to validate.
That would be very nice.
And here's another theory I'm going to throw out there. So just, you guys don't like it, throw it right back at me. But what if Zen 6 could use either the Zen 4 IO die or the new platform? That would mean the 6-core could use a cheap IO die, and then the high-end ones can use the advanced packaging with better graphics. I don't know. Yeah. I'm just throwing these ideas out there, people. This is really opening up the possibilities for what AMD could do. And I think this could be a lot of fun to see what happens. Way more fun. It already was fun. Now please AMD start telling us more, because this is going to be fun to talk about. But Techno writes in and he says, what would your ideal Medusa Halo look like? Dan, why don't you go first?
I mean, honestly, from what I'm seeing, it would be mostly more of the same from what Strix Point is. That, if they could fit it on desktop, that would be awesome. A Vcache model, if it would be interesting. I mean, I could say 60 compute units, but I don't know if it's still at 40.
Who knows? And who knows how strong a compute unit will be with RDNA
exactly.
5. So
if it's still at 40 compute units or something with a Medusa Halo, sure. And I don't know, still probably 16 cores. I think it's mostly going to be, at least from how it feels, it's going to be maybe a big iterative step, but it's going to feel iterative. I don't think it needs to double core counts or double CU counts or something.
Yeah, I really don't know. I've seen people in some online discussions saying they know it might be some wild thing. So I could see it going either way, iterative, but coming out on time, beating the competition to market, which seems to be what AMD's all about the past couple of years. But I could also see them just making it even bigger. Who knows? Maybe they really want to go for because that is an argument to be made, depending on how well Strix Halo does, especially. You might go, well, if it can push 4060s and 4070s out of the market, or I guess next year really just 5060s, then AMD goes, well, why wouldn't we make Medusa bigger? Let's make it so it can push out 5080s. Let's make it so OEMs don't want to use that. You guys won't buy our graphics cards, so we're going to make you buy one with the CPU.
If that's what it ended up being, I would just hope that, and I'm sure there would be, that there are a number of cut down, or not even necessarily cut down, just using different graphics tiles. So you can get a 16 core with 60 CUs, 40 CUs, 20 CUs, whatever. That
would make sense. Well, if they went up, to say 60, 80 CUs for an APU, yes, I would assume there has to be a smaller option. Actually, what would be really cool? I believe Strix Halo uses the FP11 socket on laptop, and I believe Hawkpoint, Strix Point, they use FP8. What would be interesting is if they had Medusa Halo and then various versions of it, and they made one of them kind of like the Navi 3231 hybrid that just barely fits it onto the smaller socket.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
You could see them doing that. The possibilities here, I mean, to answer Techno what I want, I think you kind of gave a similar answer to what I wrote down ahead of time. It's just, to me, I don't need them to go for a 200 watt APU or something insane. I just want a good 45 watt APU that can give me 4K 60 medium settings, and call it a day. And I think Strix Halo is going to kind of be close to that performance, actually, if not at least easily do that in 1440p. So from that perspective, just make it so I can really do everything. Don't go too hard with it, and make it so it can scale it down to 15 watt packages, and then scale it up if you can to 150 watts. Because I'm going to be honest too, I've noticed I've heard people say this. Droids told me this. Actually, the DAW engineer that was on told me this as well. The digital audio workstation engineer. APUs seem to edit audio and video very, very well. I've noticed that playing with them recently due to my desktop issues. And so I could, if they had a 150 watt version of Medusa Halo that can compete with a 4080, I'd take a 30% haircut to graphics performance from a 4090 if it meant it never crashed. And it just always worked because the drivers are so much simpler on a unified APU stack. So I don't know. That's what I want. Make it unified, do Apple-like optimizations for it in the OSs, and just keep making it better, because Halo kind of already looks like what I was dreaming of a long time ago anyways, right?
Yeah.
All right, let's see here. Quick Jumper writes in, hey, Tom, you talked about Zen 6 being a big redesign. Can you talk about the details? How long has AMD been working on these changes? I mean, what? They work on these things for like 5 years. I mean, at least from concept to launch. So, the long and the short of it with Zen 6 pretty much is, and again, I can't say too much, because I mean, some of this I'm probably saving for a video that I want to do soon. But the memory controller had to be, I was told, designed from scratch for Zen 6. They were intending to have Zen 5 basically be Zen 6, but then take it and go to a new packaging like we're now talking about they're going to, with a few other changes. From what I heard is they had a lot of problems with the Zen 5 memory controller, so Zen 6 needs a brand new one. And so that's going to be a big change. And then I also continue to hear interesting things about what nodes they're using. Like they may actually use 2 nanometer. And I mean, look, they're using 3 nanometer for IO dies now. They may be using the most advanced nodes for a lot more of the tiles than you might expect them to in the next generation. But that's really all I can say. I mean, I expect Zen 6 to have at least a 10% IPC increase. I don't know. If you put a gun up to my head, I'd say 12%, but I don't really know for sure. And no one's told me that. That's my guess. But what they're going to have is massive latency reductions that in some games, and in some use cases will be, of course, above 12%. And then on top of that, though, I think what they'll do is go, okay, we're not getting the IPC increase we got with the previous, like Zen 3 and 4 and 5. Finally, then it would be time to give us more cores. So that would be my suggestion, is what they're also doing probably as well. All right, let us now move on here to story number 6. FSR 3.1 added to 5 games and tested. First, starting from a quote from AMD's own press release, but then moving on to some editorialization. AMD FSR 3.1 brings significant improvements and new capabilities to enhance your gaming experience. Again, I'm quoting AMD. We have upscaling image quality improvements that improve temporal stability, reduce flickering and shimmering, and enhance ghosting reduction and better detail preservation. There's now also enhanced frame generation. We have decoupled frame generation technology that works seamlessly with other upscaling solutions. So use FSR 3 frame interpolation with Nvidia or Intel's own upscaling techniques if you want to. And they also have upgradable FSR APIs, a simplified upgrade for developers for future versions of FSR. This is something I believe NVIDIA started doing with DLSS a bit ago. What this does is they are mandating, if you add FSR to a game, I believe, that you have a separate DLL file just for the black box. Well, not black box, open source, but the box that is the code for FSR. Meaning, if AMD goes to FSR 3.1, they want devs to be able to pretty much flick a switch and let it work. They'd have to do QA again, but they want it to be that simple, so they stop dragging their feet. Like, because there's still plenty of games out now that will get updates to the new DLSS, but still have FSR 1.0, and it's just stupid. And also, they added support for Vulkan Xbox Game Development Kit. FSR is yet again catching up, it seems like. By current reviews, like Ancient Gameplays, the quality of the upscaling is actually significantly better, despite just being called 3.1. And AMD have already had very competitive, not better, frame generation to begin with. Now, AMD is likely trying to capitalize on this by somewhat decoupling their upscaling from frame generation. This gives devs, especially those focused on NVIDIA, more incentive to use FSR 3.1, even if just to replace DLSS frame gen. Again, for people that might be, using Ampere or something. But by doing so, FSR upscale will also be an option in the game. This decoupling also foreshadows machine learning-based upscaling that AMD seems to be preparing to introduce within a year. And Sony will introduce the PS5 Pro. And they will benefit from FrameGen being already independent, as they'll be able to easily add on top of AI FSR. Further, by mandating and splitting FSR into a separate DLL, AMD is greatly improving modability of FSR. Yeah, so I guess I'll just stop there and go, yeah, I think this is the one thing I would add before I throw it to you, Dan, is it is very clearly what they're doing here. It's very clear what they're doing here. It's easy to update FSR. You can use frame generation with our competitors, meaning use AMD frame generation, which seems to be as good or better than NVIDIA's actually, despite being not relying on any special hardware. Use that with DLSS. So a developer goes, well, we have to add FSR to our game. I mean, they have frame generation that lets Ampere people generate frames while using DLSS. They're going to want that feature. So AMD is making devs want to add FSR now. They're making it so they can upgrade it easily in the future to future versions of FSR. And I think this is all setting the stage for, in a year, FSR 4.0 coming out with machine learning updates. And it's you as close to flipping a switch as you can in a bunch of games that already support FSR because they want to have frame generation with DLSS. So I think that's the most interesting part for me. But I know you also tried to look around at how much better it actually is in image quality. So please, Danny, share with the class.
Oh boy. I mean, yeah, just from like what they're saying here, all seems good to me, because I do think there's been a problem with AMD's competitor technologies to Nvidia's AI, deep learning based.
Well, and things. Intel's to a certain extent as well,
because there's CSS.
And Tim at Hardware Unboxed says it does seem to work better than FSR. Maybe not FSR 3.1 though.
There's been this issue with FSR and even to an extent frame generation that AMD always makes it feel like it's a beta for some reason, which they need to get past that, and just making it easier to implement it into every game by just having a simple package that you can slot in is great. Decoupling the two is great, so you can use one or both, or in mix and match with other technologies that are available depending on what hardware you have. That's all great. That provides an incentive to get devs to actually stop dragging their feet. Because the other big problem is, and it didn't seem like it would be the problem that they would have at first, is it just doesn't seem to be getting the adoption that DLSS is getting, because they just aren't pushing hard enough.
It wasn't like FreeSync crowding out G-Sync, which a lot of people guessed that came on the show expected that to happen. That has not happened with FSR against DLSS.
And I do have to say, like, when you see a game, when you see companies dragging their feet to like implement newer versions of FSR, so you get like a game that still for some reason only has FSR 1.0, it really sucks, because just from personal experience, FSR 2 I think is worth turning on to some degree in most games that have it. Although
I agree.
It definitely does have issues when compared to DLSS. FSR 1.0 is dog shit though in a lot of ways, and like I wouldn't really even want to turn it on in a game like Deep Rock Galactic. But once the FSR 2 came to Deep Rock Galactic, I was like, oh, this feature is awesome now. So just from that level, great. And then as far as an image quality perspective, like, yeah, from what I saw from like ancient gameplays, it looks significantly better than I'd expect from most of what I've seen with FSR. Unlike those fine details, it doesn't seem to be blurring them or completely screwing them up like FSR, even on quality mode, does sometimes. And that is a big issue that they've had to solve with FSR, is that shimmer issue. So if they're finally past that, good job, AMD. I think you finally have a technology that is roughly equivalent to what DLSS is, and doesn't feel like a more bargain bin version of DLSS. Now just get it into more games.
Yeah. Which again, I think me and you are pretty down on FSR, I would say, over the past 6 months. This is starting to give me some confidence again.
Yeah.
That they realize they have to at least mostly catch up. If they feel like they're a full gen or two behind in this tech, no one's buying RDNA 4 over a Blackwell card that's maybe 10% weaker, but hey, has better DLSS. No one's doing it.
Yeah, and I think there's been a decent amount of fudding on AMD graphics lately, and understandable to some extent. Like, RDNA 3 didn't pan out to what it was supposed to be. RDNA 4 isn't really even going to be an improvement from the
raster
perspective. Yeah. I mean, it'll be more efficient and cheaper, but yeah.
Probably better ray tracing too, but we'll see.
But they're not really iterating. They're not making their cards any more powerful. It's probably going to be weaker. So I get why there's a lot of fudding, but if they're continuing to develop FSR, that does tell me that they're committed to continuing making graphics. Now, maybe in the future, that means they're mostly a iGPU company for their graphics, but I don't know if their iGPUs are getting to mid-range. Okay, that's fine with me.
Now that it's warming up outside, Jessie couldn't be happier to be jumping around every day in the warmer weather. And it's good for me too. Running around with her, teaching her tricks, that's good for my health as well, not just hers. But all of this gallivanting, well, it takes up time and it pressures me to make my lunches quicker to get moving faster with Jessie every weekend afternoon. And usually quick means less healthy. Well, unless you know about Vite Ramen. This piece of content is brought to you by Vite Ramen. Vite Ramen is a healthy, tasty, and shelf-stable food crafted by an American startup that offers a ton of options for eating healthy, like their classic packages that make it easy to add protein and other ingredients of your choice, and then also their Ramen Go packages that offer a healthy microwavable option for those who truly only have a 15-minute lunch break away from home. And I do need to take a second also to remind everyone that they don't just make ramen. They also have Nano Boost Vitality Powder that I honestly think blows away the health powder competition. I literally drink this any night a broken silicon is recorded extra late instead of coffee. And they also have a collection of silverware and accessories that are always high quality. Like the Goofy Girl DM Nakiri knife, I tried it out. It is insanely sharp. It is probably the nicest knife this household owns. So not just the ramen, although the ramen's great. Everything else on there is high quality, and that's why I've been working with Vite Ramen for so long. I actually like their products, all of their products, a lot. I've never tried something they made that wasn't good, so check them out. And remember that even just clicking on the link in the description helps the channel a ton, and buying some of the special packs through that link helps you save money and support the channel even more. So support Moore's Law Z by checking out Vite Ramen today. Let me throw in this question here that I was going to ask at the end. JJ Golden writes in, he says, RDNA 4 seems like AMD quiet quitting gaming GPUs. I don't know. I'm worried we are heading to a mid-range and above monopoly from a single company. Are you concerned as well? No, I'm not. But if RDNA 4 were to faceplant, yeah.
If RDNA 4 is terrible, yeah, that would be bad. I do think RDNA 4 is, from what I can tell, it's a generation of, listen, this is what we have this generation. We're still putting it out. RDNA 5 will hopefully deliver on power again. And that's why I'm hoping to see something like they call I'm hoping they call it like the 8700 XT and just say like we're doing RDNA 1 again, which people generally liked RDNA 1.
Which actually took some market share, I believe, and did well. So why not?
If they can do that, and then RDNA 5 feels like a return to form like RDNA 2 was, go for it. That's fine. Mm-hmm. If RDNA 4 sucks, then yeah, I'm worried about their graphics. But yeah, as I said earlier, I do think the fact that they're continuing to put work into their software suite for graphics suggests that they're not quiet quitting, or as some people even seem to suggest that they're like planning on exiting the market, which no,
they are not planning on exiting the market that they need to support to continue to innovate on their APUs, which is what is making them all of their money, people. No, they're not doing that. And true. PS6, I mean, no. Yeah, I would say when it like this whole idea of them quiet quitting, I think people just cannot. I just feel like some groups can, and some people and in some communities cannot get this through their head. It is a choice to not launch top RDNA 4. They could have done it. They could have. Like, it was a choice to not. There was a big Polaris, I believe. They said that what went into the Xbox One X was derived from a design they had for a 384-bit, I believe, 3072 stream processor design. So that would have been like, what would that be, like 30% more stream processors, 50% more bandwidth. And that would have probably competed almost with the 1080, but had more RAM. But they chose not to. When did that happen, Polaris? Oh, right before Zen launched, because AMD knew they just needed some graphics cards to keep the lights on. They had to make Ryzen a success.
And it is
that is what's happening now again with laptop. Strix Halo is going to use advanced packaging. They don't want to waste that capacity on GPU right now when the GPU market is in a downturn from an oversupply for both mining and due to COVID shortages.
And it is funny how those cards do sometimes still end up being pretty highly received cards, like the 580.
Back there somewhere.
Like the 580 was a pretty sought after card for such a long time because it was cheap and it got the job done. But
Right. And so it's like, did anyone think AMD was quiet quitting graphics cards during Polaris? No, people love Polaris. So it's a choice. In fact, I actually want to look at Amazon best GPU sellers, because I think you can still sometimes find 580s in like the top 10 selling. It's the number 4 on Amazon is the 580. God. So they're still selling. And so we're talking about like 8 years of this architecture selling. And that's what you would compare RDNA 4 to. Did that feel like quiet quitting? No. Now, if RDNA 4 has a half-ass low volume launch, doesn't do well, then I'll start to worry. But it is a choice. It has been a choice before. And I mean, going all the way back to Fermi, I believe in 2011, AMD had a die that was like 30, 40, 50, like a third smaller than the GTX 580 with a 256-bit bus instead of a 384-bit bus. And they just sold a card for like $350 instead of $500. I mean, this is something AMD honestly tends to do every 2 to 3 gens. It is actually kind of an anomaly that 7970, 290X Fury all tried to compete that many generations in a row for the top of performance. They've always typically done mid-range. Then every now and then they're like, shank, and they throw in a really high-end one. So, no. One data point is not a trend, and in fact, this is something they've been doing basically their entire life. They're not quite quitting at all, or at least the data doesn't suggest that. Namid Dakar writes, and it says, I have been recruited recently as a game developer in February, and now I'm working on an Unreal Engine 5.3 game. I'm currently finishing the implementation of FSR 3 and frame generation in said game, and we're also currently in the progress of migrating to Unreal Engine 5.4 because it brings great performance improvements. I've heard that from a few developers. The issue is that contrary to Nvidia, AMD has not yet provided a UE 5.4 FSR plugin and plans to release it with FSR 3.1 according to an AMD employee on their GitHub. So we're basically made to choose between 5.4 and FSR 3 until AMD releases it, which is not a great position to be in. I was hoping you had information. No, I mean, FSR 3.1 is supposed to officially come out, I believe, in July or something. I think AMD is just hoping you wait a month or I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I get... It would be nice if like they could, release some of the like dev side stuff before the before the consumer side stuff. I mean, that would kind of just make sense, but.
Molly the Bully writes in and says, this question opinion comes as a little late, but I feel like it hasn't been sufficiently addressed by the press or the media. So I feel like this may be a good guest. So this was for a guest episode that we're saving for this. It says, whenever I hear ray tracing cores and optical flow accelerators, what I'm really hearing is blast processing. I believe that was for a Sega console. Sure, it may be a thing, but it's not like that big of a thing as corpo marketing clearly wants us to believe it is. As someone who is fascinated by John Carmack's talk about ray tracing in 2008 and someone who wrote their own toy ray tracing engines over the years, I feel like it is much more about software than hardware. While AMD's upscaling is no match for DLSS, its frame generation actually seems to be quite competitive without any of these optical flow accelerators. Nvidia has been catering to the professional market for years. What do you think? How much is it about hardware versus software? Should Nvidia be under more scrutiny for its marketing claims? I mean, yeah, I think so. Having said that, one of my best Nvidia sources told me that, well, they think they could get DLSS frame generation working on Ampere. They believe it would not work as well. And I think the person really emphasized the thing to emphasize about what this person said is, yes, right now it doesn't seem like you need the optical flow accelerator, but they're improving DLSS 3's performance every few months with updates, and they just want to focus on the one that can do it the best. And over time, what DLSS 3 is going to turn into over the next year, Ampere could never run without an optical flow accelerator. That is the argument an NVIDIA employee would make. And remember, this is someone who's given me some of the best NVIDIA leaks I've ever had over the past 2 years. So this person isn't lying. So I don't know. Should NVIDIA be under more scrutiny? Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what they're doing is just adding things to cards for professional and then finding a way to use them for gaming. Yeah. But they are finding a way, and that's why they're doing it. They make bigger dies than AMD that are meant for professional. And so they have all these extra parts there that gaming probably doesn't need to be the most efficient in price performance. They don't care about being the most efficient in price performance. AMD does. So I don't know. I think what you would also say is you should commend AMD for being able to be even closer, better at all without using one. It's really, I think, more about not assuming NVIDIA's entirely lying, just saying, I guess AMD did a good job with their frame generation, right?
Yeah.
All righty. Now let us move on here to the final story of the night with story number 7. So, quoting here the story is, Sony and Apple are allegedly suspending development of their VR devices, quoting first from Android Central, then the information.com, and Upload VR, some editorialization. Until now, the PSVR 2 has been a pretty darn good VR headset. Well, with over 200 games that are currently available. However, the headset now has an insurmountable problem. Sony apparently no longer cares about it. Sources close to Android Central have revealed that Sony is making deep cuts to funding for VR games. Well, I'll paraphrase for anonymity. This person's source was told that there will be very few opportunities for VR game development at Sony going forward. To back that up, another source of Android Central said that they only had 2 PSVR 2 games are at development in Sony anymore. From the information, Apple has told at least one supplier that it has suspended work on its next high-end Vision headset. An employee at a manufacturer that makes key components for the Vision Pro said the company is still working on a more affordable version of the Vision product with fewer features before the end of 2025, so before the end of next year. Upload VR said that 8 months after launch, Quest 3 has sold somewhere north of 1 million units, while 3 years after launch of Quest 2, it sold somewhere around 20 million. But this slower pace isn't unexpected. It's still pretty bad. Quest 2 launched at $100 cheaper than its predecessor, which was immediately taken off the market. In contrast, Quest 3 launched at $200 more expensive than Quest 2 and has continued to be sold at an even lower price. Since March, Quest 2 has been sold at $200, while Quest 3 remains at $500. So what is going on here? Did AI kill the metaverse, or is it the price tag? By all indications, VR just is not doing well right now. Sales are low, especially compared to last generation. Quest 2 and PSVR 1. Even Apple has reportedly chosen to scrap the high-end Vision Pro 2 in favor of developing cheaper, cut down stuff. And that's Apple, a company usually capable of charging much higher prices, and yet still no one was buying. So why is VR in life support now? It really could be AI. Since the generative AI hype started, have you heard about the metaverse at all? I haven't. It seems AI has pushed metaverse out of the zeitgeist. But we can also notice that 3 flagship devices have one thing in common. They're all just too expensive, and maybe that's also why they're not selling. So I thought this had to be a story because, I mean, when the Vision Pro was announced, that was the main story. PSVR 2 is a story. This is actually pretty shocking how much worse Quest 3 is selling, and that PSVR 2 seems to be going nowhere.
I mean, yeah, if it's AI that's killing the hype for
I think it is
for VR, then we talk about the zeitgeist, I guess, but it's like, well, yeah, then that was just a thing companies were forcing into the zeitgeist, and now, like Sid from Toy Story, I don't want to play with you anymore. And they're done playing with their stupid VR toys that I guess not many people wanted.
Where's my stupid VR toy? It's got to be around here somewhere. I know where
I think the problem with VR is it is cool to play in those environments for a little bit, at least for me, but I've never found what it offers to give me enough value to actually want to go out and buy a VR headset. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the case for most people. So it's just not a very high volume. I mean, it's not a market with a very high level of adoption. And it's always going to be that way because you're never going to be playing most of your games in VR. So why would you spend something that you could, why would you spend the same amount of money that you could to buy just a game console? Even a cheap VR headset. Okay, so somebody has a PS5, a PC like me. I have like $200 lying around that's burning a hole in my pocket, and I need to spend it on something to play with.
On fire. Buy
something.
No!
Oh God! Okay, I'm buying a Switch. I guess I don't know. I don't know if I want to buy VR. Now, what could convince me to buy a VR headset is PSVR 2 getting full PC support, because then there might be enough there for me to want to spend the money to get it. But given that I can't play PS5 VR games with like a Quest, and I can't play PC games with the PSVR headset.
And even if you can soon, it seems like there may be some limitations. It might not have HDR or whatever.
It's just like there's just nothing there. There's not enough games for me to get one for each, and they're too expensive for me to justify getting it for both. So I'm just not going to ever get either, I guess. And I don't know. There never seemed to be a ton of enthusiasm about VR in general. It's a thing. Somebody like tells you, "Hey, I got a VR headset," and you're like, "Oh, that's interesting." And that's kind of the extent of what VR is.
Yeah.
And the Vision Pro was all those issues quadrupled, because now it's like twice to 4 times more expensive, depending on what you're talking about. Even like,
yeah, I'm looking at it right now on Amazon. It's like a bundle is $650, and it comes with a game. I mean, yeah, I don't know. That's, I mean, yeah, you could get the Quest 2 for like $300-$200 at times, I think. So this is ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah. So the Apple Vision Pro, like, or Pro Vision, or whatever the hell they call it. Yeah, I'm sure
it's the X Elite Pro Vision.
Oh crap! They put Snapdragon in there too now. Dang. Jesus, I forgot how expensive it is. It's $3,500.
Yes.
So it's 3 times more expensive than the most premium VR headsets, and it does less. Like, I don't know who's buying that aside from the biggest Apple nerds or people like Marquez Brownlee, who makes all of his money off of this and can afford to spend $3,500 on it. Although, let's be honest, he was probably sent that one by Apple.
Oh, yes, I can assure you he was. Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say first, and this reminds me of the conversation I had with, sadly, it's Bradley, about the goal for the Vision Pro, which was, yeah, it costs $1 bazillion, and you know what, though? It does have the best of everything. The idea they're going with isn't the PSVR 1 approach, which is, let's make it as cheap as possible to get it into people's hands, and then we'll figure out what to make better. They're going to go, we're going to make everything as good as it could be, and then the things people actually use will check a box, the things they don't, and then we'll just cut out half the features and make the real product for the next gen. I do feel like the press is missing that, like, at least Sally is Bradley's opinion is that was their goal, and I agree. Mm-hmm. So let's just keep in mind that I didn't ever think there was going to be a Pro 2. Maybe they were working on one.
We'll see what the Apple Vision or maybe it would just be called the Vision, because there isn't a base model Vision. Mm-hmm. But if they could sell that for $1,000, all of the features that no one cares about are cut. Okay, maybe there's a market for it, but
it still sounds expensive to me.
Still, like, so what we're paying for is what? So we can do virtual teleconferencing with, where it looks like we're in a virtual environment,
and your eyes look insane,
and everybody's like me now, like from Wheeze. Like, I don't really get the idea behind it. And sure, if they make the motion, like the eye capture and like the facial animation stuff better, it would be more immersive. But there's still a layer of fakeness that I think naturally turns every person off. That it's like, well, sure, Apple is giving me a very good approximation of what this person might look like, what they're doing right now or how they're saying it. But at the end of the day, it is an approximation of what they would actually look like. Mm-hmm. And I think most people would rather just acknowledge that they're not in a room together and talk on Zoom,
or also have a meeting in a room with people. You know,
well, I'm saying
crazy thought too. You could just do that or look at a camera.
If you're doing teleconferencing, though, like,
no, I know, but it doesn't really replace either of them. It's worse than just using a webcam, and it's worse than meeting in person. It's not as convenient as using a webcam. It looks weirder, and if you really want to see them, then let's see them. You know,
and if we're talking about a conference room with 10 people in it, a virtual conference with 10 people in it, we're talking about $35,000 of Vision Pros to get that meeting going. I mean,
that's so true.
Like, you have to think about that. So a company of, like, let's say a medium-sized company wants to go all virtual, and they really want to push Vision Pros. If they have 500 employees, are they going to want to spend, what would that be, like $2 million on Vision Pros for to give them that, it's just not worth it.
It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Yeah. Yeah. So, and I think the other thing to really talk about here is it seems obvious to me that like both Meta and PlayStation with the PSVR 1 and the Quest 2, they went for market share. I would imagine the PSVR 1 made a small profit. I heard the Quest 2 made almost no profit, like maybe 10% at most, losing money when it first came out as well. I did a whole leak about that a while ago. You guys want to look it up. I leaked the BOM cost of these VR devices. And in that leak, it became very clear to me that Sony was making like 30, 40% margin on this damn thing. And it just seems like all of these VR companies at the same time decided we went for market share. Now's the time to go for money and quality. And if we do that, everyone will buy it again. And they didn't. Actually, the time was to double down on market share harder. The PSVR 2 needed to be cheap. The Meta Quest 2, the Quest 3 needed to be cheaper because I think a lot of people bought PSVR 1 and the Quest 2, which were the top selling VR devices. For a while, PSVR 1 was dominating it, but then the Quest 2 just flattened that. But overall, those were really the ones that most people probably used. And they are fine with that or nothing, I think. I would suggest that until it gets to the point that it's actually even better than what the Vision Pro could do, what people want is for you to be able to take something this big, these glasses, put them on, projection, and it has a 10-hour battery life. That is what people want, wirelessly. And until you do that, why would someone get a new thing? Yeah, I know the resolution is twice as good. It has HDR maybe, but it's not really a better experience. Really, it's not this. It's not just putting this on.
But Tom, you haven't seen the reality that the movie Ready Player One has to offer of kids running through the streets playing VR games for some reason. But that's the future Facebook wants you to have.
Yeah, so I don't know. I guess it's not surprising to me. I kind of expect, once I saw the price, I did expect the PSVR 2 to not do as well. Same with the Quest 3, frankly. But this is even doing more worser than, and I know that's not a real word, people, but this is doing much worse than I thought any of us would have anticipated. I mean, this is like a complete disaster, it seems.
Yeah. I mean, I do just find it a little funny that like Facebook's or Meta's change their whole company around being the metaverse. The concept of the metaverse and the name metaverse is from a book called Snow Crash, and it's a dystopian novel about where everybody is forced to live in a metaverse. The metaverse is bad, and like Mark Zuckerberg just read that and he was like, this sounds awesome.
This sounds great, man. Yeah, I mean, so
stuff like that, it was just always going to fail because people don't want that unless you're an alien like Mark Zuckerberg.
I will say, though, a lot of this does make me go, and you know, most of that write-up was from Carbon Cry. You know, it was him really pointing out that the AI hype may have killed VR. I think it might have.
I agree. They can force one thing into the zeitgeist at a time, and now they're trying to do AI.
And so, but that's just so silly because that just means people are buying. But I guess now they say it out loud, that's not really a surprise at all. People were buying into the AI, the VR hype, and assuming they wanted a VR device. And the second not everybody's talking about VR, people don't buy VR because I guess they didn't really want it.
Yeah, and there are aspects of VR that are cool. It's just really hard to get something like that to have. It's really hard to get something like that to get wide adoption because the things that make it cool are very limited. So it's really just going to be people that have a decent amount of money to spend that want to get it, that get it.
Yeah, the only other thing I can say is, I mean, there's like record travel this year. People, after the lockdowns, are really going outside like crazy. Maybe VR had its moment and they thought it was a rising tide going upwards, but no, that was it. 20 million or 10 million, you know, Quest 2s, people buying PSVR 1. Well, I guess that one was before that, but that was it. That was the bubble, and now it's gone. And now, oh no, I guess, yeah, the VR craze really was mostly though before, I guess, but also kind of during COVID. I guess my only argument is, you know, now that people are traveling and going outside even more than ever before, maybe they just are completely uninterested in VR this year. So, but again, we're talking about a complete collapse in sales here, not like selling half as well, like a tenth as well. That is, it's not just that. Right. I actually want to take some more of these questions that we're going to ask at the end and throw them in now since we're kind of on the subject. Let's see here. AI Meable Chief writes in and goes, would you bet that Jensen has already drawn up plans about how to survive the AI bust that involves something other than running back into gamers' arms with fistfuls of the latest GPUs? Or do we witness his final form and he quits while still on top at some point? That'd be funny. Yes. For sure, they've already thought about how they're going to swing that. Will they do it successfully? I'm not so sure, but they have plans.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have a guess for where they're going to go after this, but there's no way there haven't been conversations that this is a bubble. Like, I'm not a finance genius, and I pretty.
You're not into the stonks.
I'm saying I'm not like some finance genius. I don't think I'm stupid, but like, I think anybody that's looking at the market could see that this is a bubble, is all I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm. And
so I'm sure somebody at Nvidia that's smarter than me at finance has brought this up.
It's like, oh, we know it's a bubble. And why do you think we're going, Blackwell, Hopper? I mean, not Hopper, Blackwell. No, yeah. Why do you think we're going from Lovelace to Blackwell and the one after that so quickly? Because we got to get it in now because we know we can't wait. Yeah, I think so. Will they completely succeed? I don't know, but I'm sure they've had conversations about it. Hayabu writes and says, what will happen to all this server capacity that is being built up worldwide after the AI bubble deflates? Will researchers who need server time suddenly get a good deal as these companies look to find anyone who will rent them out? Would potentially be cheaper to just turn them off. First of all, for sure that's going to happen. I think what we're going to see when the AI bubble pops is people who want to do AI research but couldn't afford it will now be able to buy Hopper for half the price. And then gamers will see a flood of 4090s and all of these 4090Ds being sold in bulk from China to the United States all of a sudden, just like the end of a mining boom. For sure that's going to happen.
That's true. But I guess it depends, though, because I think a lot of AI researchers, they can probably already get some of those. Like, I remember reading a paper a while back. I thought it was funny because in the paper they cited an EVGA 2080 Ti in their materials and methods. So it's like you can get a 2080 Ti that can do a lot of that already. Mm-hmm. Or these days a 3080 or something, or a 3080. Maybe you would want like a 3080 10 gigabyte or something, or 12 gigabyte. Whatever.
They probably want the 3090 much more, but there are some workloads where they can choose a 10 gigabyte.
And the 3090, what is that going for, like $700 now?
I have to check because the GPU prices have been a little weird. I believe that one has been like $600-700, but let me go to buy it now. Ignore the most expensive ones. Yeah, you can get them for $700. 700 is what I'd say. Plenty of them are going closer to $800, but it's $700. Okay. And I've already heard that too. I don't remember where, but I don't remember if I was talking to a source or with someone on a podcast that I spoke with like a month ago or something, but that this is already actually happening, that already you're seeing a lot of these orders, like the lead times are like almost zero now, and people are realizing they don't need as many of these cards and they're selling them at discounts. It's starting to happen already. So I don't know. I don't know when this bubble will pop, but it's clearly going to, because it is a bubble. Remember, bubble doesn't mean that this technology is useless or that it wasn't worth what it was worth a year ago. It's just intrinsically, just eventually, if it keeps going like this, I mean, when you have like Nvidia being a significant portion of the S&P 500, like Nvidia loses $500 billion because their stock price goes down. In theory, they didn't really lose anything. And that $500 billion represents like 100 other companies in the S&P 500 or something. Mm-hmm. Think about that. That's crazy. So yeah, but I do wonder if it's actually just going to be at the end of next year. So it pops. Yeah. If not, I think by the end of 26, because what would make it pop is people going, I'm still not doing anything with this on my laptop, and I was so excited to buy AI after I was so excited to buy Quest 2, and I don't use it anymore. Oh, I don't need any of this. And then a lot of it will be useful, most of it won't, and you'll just see a drop in like a fourth of the stock market by 50% or something. So I'm sure that'll be fun, but I think it's going to happen by end of 26 probably. All right. Let us now move, and I'm sure no one, if I'm wrong, will tell me I was wrong about that in 2 years, by the way. All right, let us now move on to the final wrap-up. These are the final stories. These are ones that, of course, we thought were worth mentioning, but not big enough for them to get their own like dedicated discussion. So the 5000 XT, these are the higher clocked Zen 3 models, are launching July 31st. This is something that I believe is being covered by like video cards and a few other places. I've also heard this from people at retailers as well. So if you want to upgrade to a faster clocked Zen 3, that will also be happening the same day Zen 5 is coming out. Also, there's data that the PC market is recovering pretty well. So that's good, I suppose, for the people that, you know, I'll just be honest, I work with a lot of my sources and stuff. We really went through a downturn there. But I think it's worth pointing out because I think all too often you see companies, especially Intel, go, well, sales were down, but that mimics the rest of the market. They're going back up. So if you see one company doing well and one doing bad, it is because they did bad now. Also, the Steam summer sale started. I don't really have anything to say about that, but I will say my girlfriend just finally bought Red Dead Redemption 2. And was scared that the game would be too hard. But then I told her, if you lose combat, I think 3 times in a row, they just let you skip it. So you're good, I think. Also, I know like a comedian we like, Jason Mantzoukas, basically just goes fishing every day in it. So you don't need to fight people. Let's see. Also, the unreleased mini Keystone Xbox like online only console, patents of it have leaked actually. And I think, oh my God, I'm just realizing this too in the article. Someone realized one of the prototypes was in the background of one of Phil Spencer's. So there you go. That confirms exactly what it was. Keystone is a code word I had been told by a couple sources before too. I just never really had anything to say because I found it very uninteresting. And now it's never coming out. So, I mean, there you go.
And to loop that in with the next story, right? It's coming to Xbox is coming to Fire TV. I mean, there's no. I think that got canceled because why make a dedicated piece of hardware when you could just put it on something else?
Yeah, that's clearly what's going on here. And I don't really have anything else to say about that, but I do have one more reader mail here from Compressed Earth Blocks who asks, hey guys, where do you see exclusives? They're mostly gone with even Sony releasing on PC now, I'll buy with a delay usually. Teenage me would hate this because obviously my PS2 is better than your Xbox, but adult me absolutely thinks this is good moving forward. Do you think an indie or AA title, though, would have less financial risk than AAA if it was exclusive to a platform? So this actually reminds me of a conversation I had with the Spirit of the North developers that were on, I believe, a month ago. And when they made the first Spirit of the North, it came, God, I'm trying to remember what it came to first. I believe it came to PlayStation first, and then it came to Xbox and like PC. And then it came to Switch, and then they said like now 75% of their sales are Switch. So, you know, I think if you're just starting out, it's less about being exclusive and more about understanding you don't have the bandwidth to put it on every platform. And you can just release it one at a time. I think now they will be launching Spirit of the North. You know, Spirit of the North 2 will not be on Switch yet because I don't think they can get it to run on it. But you know they'll be rushing at the Switch 2 as soon as that comes out.
The one thing I would say, though, is having a period of exclusivity from like an indie or especially a AA dev, I could see that being beneficial just because those studios might not have that much cash. So having, you know, a guaranteed cash flow from a company that's like funding your game definitely sounds helpful. Indie game, I could almost see that being less important because indie games just cost so much less. So there's less of a financial risk to doing it. But
yeah, I mean, I guess the advice I would give and why I am someone you would listen to on advice on launching a game is beyond me. But at least from what I've noticed, because I have spoken to quite a few developers, some of them indie, on the podcast and just behind the scenes as well, is that it really does seem like the order that seems to work is you launch first to PlayStation and PC if you can manage it. because Steam does such a good job at promoting things, and Sony usually promotes a decent indie title well right away, but then fucks off for some reason. From what indie devs tell me, is Sony isn't good at continuing to promote good games. But there's those initial sales. There's a high attach rate to PlayStation consoles. So I think you'd want to get to PlayStation kind of first for that. And then also, though, make sure it's on Steam, because Steam has long legs with every game. It's also a Spirit of the North people told me as well, is over time that's actually catching up to Switch because they keep selling. And so you'll have Steam promoting you forever. You'll have PlayStation getting those initial sales. And then after that, it just depends what's going to be your market. Like getting Spirit of the North onto Switch made all the difference for them. And so you'll want to get it there eventually. But it's going to take a lot more work to get it there. So why would you make sure it's a simultaneously release if you don't have the money, when you can start making money right away and then start porting the version that needs you to optimize it like a crazy amount just to work?
Well, you mean, that's the they did release at the same time. That's the Rocket League trajectory, where Rocket League was never exclusive to Sony, to PlayStation, but it launched on PlayStation Plus, and if it
boy, did that blow that up.
If it hadn't launched on PlayStation Plus, I don't think a quarter. I don't think it would have gotten a fraction of the attention and money that it got, because Jesus, everybody knows Rocket League because it was on PS Plus.
Yeah, and that's where I don't know where Game Pass really comes in, because when I see what happened to Hi-Fi Rush, granted that was a studio owned by Xbox, so maybe their fault, but I do wonder, like how do you do the Game Pass thing too? Because that worked out well for Rocket League, but you want to make sure you have those initial sales. So it's almost like, I think it's a good idea to be on Game Pass or I guess PlayStation Plus if it's at the launch or right after the initial launch, but don't just put it on, right? Because it was on PlayStation Plus, Rocket League was, but you could still buy it on Steam and Xbox, right?
No, it was on PlayStation and Windows initially, and then it came everything else later.
But it was on Steam.
Yeah.
Okay, because I do think that there is a pattern we've noticed, though. If the game is only on Xbox and Game Pass and then comes everywhere else, that's an issue because it's seen as cheap. But at least if you're on Steam and Game Pass or PlayStation and Game Pass, it doesn't seem to hurt sales. I don't know. Could be wrong, but I'm not crazy, right? We've noticed a pattern there, No,
I think that's true.
So that is my long-winded answer to your question, Compressor Earthblocks. And in general, when it comes to exclusives, I don't really have a whole lot to say. I think people need to stop thinking about exclusives in terms of like bribes and stuff. Although certainly there is a degree of like Final Fantasy 16, like Sony probably paid for the marketing, or they did pay for the marketing or something. But it is also like, if 80% of your sales are going to be on one device anyways, why would you prioritize putting it on the other one right away if a company will help pay you? It is actually also more efficient to just optimize for one thing first. So, and I think you're going to see that a lot. There's going to be plenty of games that just happen to be on PlayStation for timed exclusivity because they just didn't port it to Xbox yet. And there's going to be games where it was built for the ground up for PlayStation. And there's going to be most games now that are just on everything. And it's going to be when it was easy to do it anyways. So that's a world that I think is great, Yeah. So, all right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode there, Dan. Any final words?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, as usual, I will say, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please remember to like this video. Please remember to share this video, comment below for the algorithm, subscribe to Moore's Law is Dead on YouTube. The bigger our channel becomes, the easier it is to get guests in, and actually the more sources I get, the more this has like a higher subscriber count number next to it, the more it's honestly just taken seriously. So you'll just get more guests, I'll get better sources. Subscribing helps the channel so much, and again, ring the bell button so you actually see the thing you're subscribed to, and then also subscribe to Broken Silicon on your podcast app of choice. Give us a review there, and consider joining the Patreon as well. We just had a new die shrink come out talking about what you would want to consider if you are thinking about getting Zen 5 or Air Lake this year. There's just a whole 45-minute video about that. No ads, never has ads. There's hundreds of extra pieces of content as well that you get at the lowest tier. There's tons of other stuff you get at the higher tiers as well. So please support us there. If you have the extra can of tuna or two per month, this has actually started quite
or ship a can of tuna to Tom's P.O. box. He has a P.O. box.
Please don't.
More tuna. Don't
I don't ship
tuna.
canned fish to Tom, but no, but like you're just annoyed that I wouldn't want that. Which,
He wants live fish shipped to his PO.
that would be great. Well, it is a PO box, so if you did that as a prank, no, what you're really doing is pranking the USPS,
and you're pranking the fish that you killed by doing that.
Yeah, what you're going to be doing is just making some people that work at USPS very unhappy with the smell that day, and I will probably never find out about it. But no, like whether it's 1 or 2 cans of tuna to get to that what you would consider the lowest tier, consider supporting us there if you have even that extra $2 a month. And yeah, I guess that's it. As usual, if I were to keep going right now, I would just start rambling, so I will not. Thanks for watching again. Thanks for listening again. Have a good week, everybody.
Bye.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carmen Cry and Carrie Nosugad as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the about/support page in the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carrie Nosugada as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong, we love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guest questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels: Brad Medlin, Drita Foles, Z-Jits, Daniel D, Aaron Close, Jen Rauner, Deke, Douglas Buckner, Daniel Hyde, GZ Ziggy, MJB1, Hardforum.com, SNES Chalmers, Jem Ferrier, Valcom Alev, Jensen Wang, Gregory S. Acker, Sarcastra, Evan Dingle, Chris Rich, Compressed Earthblocks, 3DS Boy 08, Halbuma, Shredbird, Toka, Greg Wancha, Colton Mobley, Sammy Molas, Benjamin Cannon, Jonathan, Jordan Simkovic, Ulian Leak, The Boss Haas, Blake, Franco Frederic, Jake223, Jake Martin, Slicky, Stephen Hart, Meat and Pork, Tim Robb, Ian Clifford, Chrysantine, Travis Cody, and Christopher A. Butler, Mad, Zutsu Taylor, Stephen Coates, Neithra Zink, Michael McGee, Greg, Patty Cakes, Amiable Chief, Tommy, Mark Mitchell, Aishan, Mark Raidmaker, James Anderson, Cole Addict, Judson N, Cameron, Wesley Sager, Henry Shang, Michelle Pell, D31337 Antics, Hexapuma, Reginald Ari, T. Connum, Jamie Witters, Jeff Sedler, Loophole 35, Windstar, JSMMH, James I. Raider, Corey Leonard, Little Germany, Shay, Milton, Post Media, Melodic Warrior, Dave Schultz, McDaffie, RDNA, Stephen Dick, Chuck Glidden, Brett Jones, Mai Sharona, Oscar Haggerty, Justin Bustle, Joe Foot, Brian Scanlon, Win Wang, Harlan, Slushball, Jason Angima, Joseph Kelly, Himsa Gung, Tailster299, Mil Valverga, John, Sisyphos7771, The Forbidden Juice, RV Racer, AC Brian Wright, Michael Cozy, Dr. J. Matt, Alex Vega, Freedy, John Swin, Jola Martina, Kikum, Elbergun, Solarized Daddy, Matthew Marlowe, Time Unveiled, Hoodat 42, Penta Winter, Rowan McKeekortster 671, Sprutnik, Jeffrey Gentleman, Angel Cake, Omega Doge, John Wick Boomstick, Nick, Suzmania, Curry King 3, Zombie Killer 777, and Porcelain Oats. And of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.